Welcome to Your College Bound Kid,
a podcast for parents, college counselors, students, and anyone who wants a weekly deep dive into the world of college admissions.
Hi, I'm Susan, and I'm a college counselor and have read applications for a small liberal arts college and 2 research universities. My twins are recent college graduates.
I'm Lisa, and I'm a clinical psychologist and college counselor. I have a daughter in college, a daughter in high school, and a son in middle school. After 30 years in Chicago, we recently moved to North Carolina.
My name is Mark. I'm a college coach in Atlanta and the parent of 2 daughters. Karis, a graduate of Davidson College, and she is the founder of the Spanish tutoring company, SpanishHelpToday.com. And Joy is a wellness coach at Keenan Flagler Business School, University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill. And I'm so blessed to be able to work alongside both my beautiful daughters at School Match for You, a college counseling firm that I founded in 2010. This week in the news, I will continue part 2 of 3, joined by Hillary Dickman from Colorado College, Vince Garcia from California, Susan Tree from Philadelphia, and from Julia Esquivel from Massachusetts. So 4 co-hosts, and well, I almost should call Hillary a co-host. She comes on and offers great insights multiple times a year. All of us will continue with part 2 or 3 of our conversation about the do's and don'ts about filling out the Common App activity section. And I'm calling it the extracurricular episode because our speak pipe question is also about ECs. That's right. A listener wants to know how are extracurriculars evaluated, not for well-resourced, not for under-resourced, but for middle-class families. So Julie and I will be discussing that. And then we'll have a brand new 4-part interview I'm very excited about. It's about how homeschool applicants are evaluated by colleges. And this is a special interview because we have 2 homeschool experts who actually are writing a book on homeschooling and college admissions, Dr. Michele Evard and Holy Ramsey. And they'll also be joined by an admission officer from Beloit College, Liam Dailey, who is an expert in college admissions and specializes in working with homeschool students. And our college spotlight, we told you we were coming back again, and Michael Keaton would be back. And he's the VP of Enrollment at Ursinus College. And Julie and I will be talking to Michael about Ursinus College over the next 2 weeks. Friends, last week we had part 1 of our conversation of the do's and don'ts of filling out the activity section for the Common App. We'll continue with part 2 of 3 with Hillary Dickman, admission officer at Colorado College, Vince Garcia, Los Angeles, Julia Esquivel, Boston, Massachusetts, and Susan Tree, Philadelphia. All join me.
I think that's part of the bias training that we receive also is to not consider one activity as more valuable than another just because it's something that we like to do, right? So like, for example, I'm a vegetarian. When I first started reading at CC, I had Wyoming and Montana and Idaho and half of Colorado. You can see where this is going, right? Like I had lots of students in my territory who were hunters and would put on their application in the activity section, like that they worked at a hunting store or the number of hours that they spent hunting with their family. And I didn't look at them differently because they're hunters. In fact, like Mark, you're always saying colleges want more of what they don't have. Well, we don't have a ton of hunters at Colorado College. And so that was almost like a benefit for them, right? That they were doing something that was different and could bring a different perspective. We do care a lot about sustainability, and so do lots of hunters. And so while I don't live the same lifestyle that they do, that didn't mean that I was, knocking them on their application because we don't share the same lifestyle.
I suppose unless something in a case like that, Hillary, comes through as belligerent or opinionated. I mean, I think that could be true of absolutely any religious, political, sociological thing on an application, is that if there is a tone of someone is not going to be interested in an exchange of ideas, civil discourse. And I think for families like the one you mentioned, Mark, where, a Jewish student might be worried about prejudice, or a Muslim student might be worried against, or a conservative Christian. Who knows? We seem to manage to be prejudiced against everybody in one way or another. That, as Julia said, when someone says, I come from a strong, belief system, but I am so excited about my college education as a time to explore and hear other people's perspectives and get ready for living in the real world. And that's what you want to hear. And, are some things, the only thing that turns me off when I read applications is when someone is ignorant. And even then, like, in committee-based evaluation, the readers will say to their partners, what impression are you getting from this? Is this just a poorly developed presentation, which is 99% of the time, that there's just not enough that's being shared, and the impression you're getting is whatever? Or is this a student who would not be a good community member? And that's when you scour the recommendations. You look at everything the student has submitted, because they may very well be a good match. And somebody, well, maybe they'll stir the pot and maybe they won't. But occasionally there is an application that comes across as just presenting an odd tone. But as Hillary said, the bias training that readers go through, and the fact that an application is never just read by one person. There's always some chain of readers, if not, committee-based evaluation.
Let's talk about a couple areas where there's a lot of nuance. Abbreviations and bullet point versus sentence structure. So I think there's points to be made on different sides of this. Susan, you made a point on abbreviations, which I think is really valid. And I made a point that might look like it contradicts your point, but I think it complements it. Do you want to talk about
Well, it just depends what you're abbreviating.
Right.
If it's common usage, that's one thing when you're trying to save characters on a line or whatever. But I find students abbreviate things, and I have no idea sometimes. And we all read applications, right? All five of us here have read applications and are reading applications. And I occasionally get stumped. Like when I see HOSA or NHS, okay. I get that. But when a student is abbreviating an organization with which they have worked, and it sounds really interesting, but I don't know if it's business or medical or social welfare, they're losing the reader. They're losing an opportunity to make a good point about something.
Yeah, and I think that's definitely true. But I also think, though, that you can be strategic, because 150 characters is so few. You don't need to say high school. You can say HS. You don't need to say junior varsity. You can say JV.
Good point.
I'm a big fan of using the ampersand, because you might use the word "and" 3 or 4 times. That's 12 characters instead of 4. Mm-hmm. And so both of these points are true, right? But there's times students get so comfortable with an acronym that's used in the internal vernacular in their school, and you don't know what it is. And Susan's bringing that point out, and I think they're both true. What are your thoughts on bullet points as opposed to sentence form as a reader? What are your thoughts, Hillary?
Yeah, I'm totally fine with like sentence fragments. The one that I'm looking at right now is the description is all in lowercase letters. There are slashes in there. There's a semicolon. Like, it's fine. I don't need you to write in full sentences. Just squeeze in as much information as you can in a way that I can read it. As long as as long as there aren't too many abbreviations, it's fine to just squeeze it all in there.
Yeah. And I think one of the things that we talked about earlier, it's really important when you're trying to pack information in there is to really focus on your impact and to give me, if you had 10 bake sales, I'd love to hear that you had 10 and you raised 5K. You can abbreviate the 1,000, There's just so many ways. And just think when you read back to it, we all know how to play volleyball. You don't need to say.
Yes. Volleyball is a sport played with. Yes.
8 people on a team. No, whatever it is. So sometimes you get a little bit of that out of your system after you do your first sort of draft, but then you've got to get it in there. And I think students are amazed. I think they think it's 150 words. I'm sure they think it's 150 words.
Totally.
So I really encourage people, like Mark says, use an abbreviation, use a semicolon, use a colon, use a dash, whatever it is. And then I get a lot of pushback with students when you're using the first two sections of the description. Before the description, it's organization and then title. There's a lot of characters in there. Fill it up. Tell me, use it all if you have something to say. And people are sort of amazed when you sort of cross, outside, or you color outside of the lines. It's okay. It's okay.
I would just add to all of that I tell my students, just if they're going to use either bullet point or sort of that resume style, semicolon narrative style, or use abbreviations, just be consistent is what I say within those. Yes. So for like your volleyball example is great, Vince, because they get to volleyball and they don't need maybe 150 characters. And then the next thing I know, I've got like a narrative statement in full sentences without abbreviations about, I have learned from volleyball, where, when it came down to National Honor Society, it was like, did 200 hours of community service at this place, blah, blah, blah. So I just like to have consistency with the narrative style and the abbreviations.
Yeah.
And I think it helps to check that in the PDF version, right? Like, how do you guys can tell me how this happens, but I know that once I see it, that students also have the option to look at it as a PDF. And when you do that, you can see where you accidentally left like a space between a letter and a period, which I'm looking at one that has that right now. I don't have a problem with that. It's just that that's like a waste of space. And to be able to create a really consistent sort of look across your activities list, which just makes it easier for us to read.
Yeah, students just need to click the preview button, and they don't see it that way when they're entering. And I see it that way if they add me as a, which all my students do as an advisor. I see it. And a lot of times when I'm sharing my screen and I show it, they're like, whoa, that looks really different when they see it the way that an admission officer is going to see it. So you always want to click that preview, certainly before you submit.
Well, and you have to, Mark. They have to click the preview in order to move to the next screen at the end of the Common App, but it's whether or not they're looking at it.
Right.
Yes. Or it's 11:58 p.m. and it's the first time, and they're like, oh, this looks wonky, and I have no time. But friends, there is a preview button at the top of every section of Common App.
That's right.
Yes.
Yeah, you should use that a lot, because I can tell when I'm reading an application, a student who has looked at the preview and has adjusted their application based on what they saw, and it's so much easier to read.
Vince brought up something I think that's really important. He talked about impact. He talked about using concrete numbers. He raised, helped out with the bake sale for cancer awareness, raised 5K or knocked on 1,000 doors. Like adding that concrete piece, I think it really is rich. But there's another extreme that I see too, where people only put awards, recognition, impact, and you don't even leave knowing what they did, So you need to know what the person did as well as any like impact they had. And so I see extremes on both sides, either ignoring the impact and just going with the description, or going with the description and ignoring the impact.
Yeah, I remember once they do these counselor development workshops for the University of California for all the counselors. And you read this beautiful essay, and a student had forgotten to tell you what instrument they were talking about.
Oh no. All the time. The time. It's like, don't they know there's a difference between being a violin and a French horn player? It's like, I really want to know.
That's a good example.
Yeah.
I do think also, to add on to that, just sort of, I need to find a new word that's not as ableist as myopia, but I find my students are really myopic about their own high school experiences and assume that the way a club is at my school is the exact same way a club is at their school, or that there's actually a lot of cool things that happen at my school that are pretty impressive that are not offered maybe at some other schools. And so just reminding students that there's thousands and millions of other high school students out there. And so not assuming that we know, certainly as the other examples, like we know what National Honor Society is, but there might be a very specific organization or activity or a leadership position that does require a little extra explanation in that activity section.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And, it's funny because I met with a student yesterday, very, very quiet, kind of introverted young man. And he doesn't have a lot of leadership. He's a STEM kid and he's done a bunch of STEM stuff. And so I'm trying to tease out of him a little bit about how, where's his heart? Where's his, the psyche in all of this? And he finally, toward the end of our meeting, said to me, does it matter what I'm doing next year, or is it too late? And I thought, oh my gosh, first of all, of course it matters what you're doing. You're just starting your young adult life. You're building it. So I gave him, you're building your bridge to college, pep talk. And he said, well, I'm really excited because I think I'm going to be elected treasurer of my technology club. And this for him was monumental. Mm-hmm. And so I said, okay, so when we talk about your common app, let's look at how you're going to express that. Because immediately I expected, it's going to be technology club, treasurer, I keep the books, Well, turns out the technology club has 500 people.
Whoa.
And they have a budget of $100,000 a year.
Gee,
wow. So
That's
I got him to as a huge, public high school. And this position for him was taking a step into a whole nother level of engagement and impact in his school. And I laughed at myself thinking, well, this is going to be kind of, whatever. And there's a lot to that. And I thought that's a great example of a student who is going to need to unpack that and talk about his responsibilities and what he's learning and why he decided to do it. And, so just for those of families listening tonight, remember, kids learn leadership in the middle. They aren't born that way. They learn by being a teammate. They learn by learning to influence for good, in the middle of organizations. Whether or not they ever end up with a title it's almost irrelevant. It is meaningful, but it's almost irrelevant because what really matters is their growth, their potential contribution as they gain maturity and confidence. As Hillary said earlier, it's wow, there's a student I'd love to have on my campus.
So Hillary, you want to give us another one of the things you noted over the year as you were taking notes? Either do's or don'ts. What do you want to share?
Yeah, this is sort of a don't. So I'm looking at an app right now from a student who took all of their individual service events that they did with NHS and put each one in a separate line, like trying to fill up their all 10 spots. And I don't need you to fill all 10 spots. It's fine if you only fill 1 or 2 or 5 or whatever, depending on what you've been doing. And it just doesn't, it has much less impact actually that way. Like one of these is 3 hours, 1 week in 1 year. You don't need to put that in its own little spot. Just combine that with all the other things that you're doing and be comfortable with not having every spot filled up. I'm probably not going to spend that much time looking at the second page anyway. So concentrate on the first page.
Yeah,
that's terrific.
Because they were a really cool student. It was just funny. It's out of character, right? Then to see something all split up in that way.
I think one of the other things that I try to dissuade students from focusing on is they should definitely speak to the things that are important to them and they've devoted a lot of time to. But I always get the question, do I have to get to 10? Do I have to?
Yeah.
No, actually. If 8, 9, and 10 are so fluffy and they only appeal to you. Like I spend 50 hours, watching videos or playing video games. I don't know. Maybe that's something I don't need to know as a reader. So no, it's really what are the things that you want to communicate about what you're bringing to that particular community that you should put on the page.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the other side of that is that it's hard to know what a reader is going to get excited about. And so you might have some sort of unusual thing. I guess playing video games is not all that unusual, but I remember reading an app from a student who didn't put anything in their activities section because they weren't doing any organized activities. And so I think they thought like, I'm not supposed to put anything down. And then in their counselor evaluation, the counselor mentioned how the student raises bantam roosters. And I was like, first of all, like, what's a bantam rooster? Why would someone raise roosters? And also, this student lives in the city limits of Colorado Springs, where having roosters is against the law, which is awesome. Then they have a rooster. Like, I love a rebel. So just to miss out on including something like that, that's really cool because you don't think that the person on the other side of the application is going to value it is a bummer, because actually that would have, I knew that student was doing it because thankfully the counselor put it in there. So I count that as an activity, but I wonder what other things she was doing that would have surprised me.
Yeah. Yeah. Good point.
What are your thoughts? And this is something I've had different admission officers have different perspectives on, of a student using additional information to include activities 11, 12, and 13. In other words,
yeah. I don't usually read it. I have had lots of students who do that, and it'll take like 2 pages. And once I've seen what's on your first page and maybe the second page, I don't need to know anymore. I know as much as I need to know at that point. So you can do it. It's not going to hurt you, but it's probably not going to help either because I don't have time to read it.
Yeah.
Now, here's a different question. What about taking one activity that you were very passionate about and 150 characters was frustrating to you, and so you want to go in depth and explain more in additional information?
Yeah, that sometimes helps me get better context for the activity. I'll give an example of my own student, Bryn. When she was in high school, she made a documentary film by herself. Like she was denied from a filmmaking summer thing that she didn't get into, and she wanted to do it anyway. And there's no way that you can explain that kind of activity in 150 characters in an activity section. So she listed it in her activity section because it took a lot of time, but then she went into more depth to explain it and to explain like that no one taught her how to do this. She got all the, equipment and books from the library and figured it out herself. And that just takes a lot more characters. So I want to see that kind of explanation in the additional activity section.
That's awesome.
Yeah, it was a great learning experience. It was great for her own like project management. It was something she really cared about. It was totally student initiated. I had to poke her a little bit at the end because it went all the way into November to get her to finish while she was still in school. But I think when a student can do or wants to do something like that and they do it on their own, it's such an amazing learning experience.
Yeah. Now I'm curious, sometimes I have students who get into things that are really selective. And they always wonder, should I put this phrase, one of 50 people selected nationwide? Should they say that? Or is that like stepping like over the line and it sounds pretentious?
I would say yes, because most of the time I don't know that it's selective unless they tell me that it's selective. There are some that I will be able to identify that I know that they're selective, but I think there are more selective programs out there than I can keep track of. So I don't mind. I don't think that sounds pretentious at all.
Great. Thank you.
Would it be enough, though, to say a very selective program?
That would be fine, too. Either way. Yeah. Any way to identify that it's not just, I don't have a problem with pay to play, right? But there's a difference between something that's pay to play and something that is selective. And so understanding that, and sometimes then I take more time on apps than I should and more than most normal people would probably. But I will go and Google that program if I know that it's a selective program, because I want to know more about it and how students are chosen and what they're looking for, because that's like another layer of people who have already read this student, who I can see then like what they found in this student that was valuable. And then that gives me a different sort of lens to look through as I'm reading.
And I think there's no risk in that. Like I have, I have an embarrassing amount of students that do have some of those STEMmy selective things and apply to a school that rhymes with BIT very close to me. And they are in the know, right? But then if they go and when they tell me, I'm like, oh yeah, totally. Wow. Congratulations. And I have to go look that up. So I think there is no risk, right? Like if the person or if the school is in the know, they're in the know, great. But then if they're not, then you've taken care of that. And, I had a student who got, he actually ended up taking a couple gap years, but he got Y Combinator, which I didn't know anything about. And I was like, oh, wow, I can't believe I didn't know about this. But I actually found about half of the places he applied to also didn't know, whereas the other half were like, whoa, that's all you needed to say about this student, right? So, yeah. So I do think I think even for pretty seasoned admission officers, you just can't maybe take that risk. And it's no harm, I think, as Hillary's saying.
Hillary, you made a good point in our pre-meeting document about activities changing over time. You not looking at someone as a quitter. Can you talk about that? Because I think sometimes kids feel a certain pressure. It also comes for picking a major too. Now you may not experience it that much at a liberal arts school, but kids feel, and parents too, like my kid's in 10th grade, he doesn't know what he wants to do. Like, welcome to the real world. But talk about the point, because probably your listeners don't know what we're talking about. I think it's worth more elaboration.
Yeah. And maybe this is something that stands out to me because my parents really valued sticking with something all the way to the bitter end. And so like I used to get that, like, you're not going to be a quitter kind of language from my parents all the time. But I mean, I know I'm not the only admission officer who says this. Dean Jay from UVA says all the time, like, I want you to do what you want to do. And if that changes from one year to the next, then change what you're doing, because you are changing, you are growing, you are developing. The opportunities that are around you may be changing. Something that like my youngest daughter, Callie, there was no volleyball. She's 6'1". There was no volleyball team at her high school until her senior year. So she picked up volleyball her senior year and was like the star middle blocker, right? Like I wouldn't have a problem looking at her application and seeing that there's no volleyball the first 3 years. That wasn't available to her. And we know that what's available to students is changing and what students want to do is changing. And I want you to do what you're interested in. And for me, like the idea that you're a quitter never really enters my head just because you're changing course. We all change course. I've had like 5 different careers. I'm not a quitter. You can tell my parents that.
It's a really important point, because students in the counseling room, they'll say this to us. They'll say, I really don't like playing JV softball. Do I need to stick with it and do it? And I think that, and of course I tell them no. Like if what I always say to them is, there's a couple reasons why. I like to start with, why do activities even matter with all my students? Let's talk about why they even matter. So what I say is, first of all, colleges are trying to figure out who you are and what you've done. Anything you do in your own free discretionary time, from the elective courses you took to what you do in the summers, is part of an insight into who you are. And the second is they're trying to project where your impact may be on their campus. And so if you're just doing this thing just to be doing it and you don't have any interest, it's defeating the purpose of what an admission officer is even going to learn from you doing it. But implicit in that question is what I see sometimes with so many of the students that I work with, which is they think these individual activities in and of themselves kind of count more than they do.
Yeah. I also, sorry, I want to go back to that for a second. Like the time when it does matter to keep doing something is when you can express some sort of certain character trait through it, right? So like I had a student who's at CC now who went to a boarding school in the Northeast, and he played JV soccer for his first 3 years, and he knew he wasn't going to make the varsity soccer team. And his coaches said, like, you don't have to keep doing this if you don't want to. And he said, you know what? I'm going to play JV soccer again senior year because I want to be a leader to the younger students on the team. And I want to be the person who like shows them our school traditions and shows them what it means to be part of a team. And that was really meaningful. But that's very different from staying on doing something that you don't really love. Like, he loved having that leadership role and that mentorship role for younger students. So that was really cool to see. And I wouldn't have seen that if he decided to just drop off and go do something else, I guess.
Totally.
That's great.
I actually had a student, I have a new junior I'm working, or not a new junior, she's one of my new counselees who I'm working with. And she made varsity tennis as a junior mostly because of her age, right? And she's got a very strong portfolio in writing and all of these other things. And she was like, I don't know, why would I stay on the team? I could be using this time to do X, Y, and Z. But then said to me, she's like, I actually really need tennis to like have physical activity. Like, it helps me do my homework. It helps me stay grounded. And I was like, well, then would you replace that time with going to the gym? And when asking her the question, she's like, I should just stick with tennis then, right? Like, this helps
So much
me.
more fun.
It gets exactly. And I was like, and that would be so great for you to articulate, and first of all, no one's recruiting you for tennis. No one cares then that you're going to, probably sit on the bench most of the time. But it really played a really important role in grounding her that made her able to do the rest of the things in her life really well.
That's a wonderful observation for her to make.
Yeah, all her.
Yeah.
Friends, this concludes part 2 of our 3-part conversation of the do's and don'ts of filling out the activity section for the Common App. Hope you join us next week for the final part.
And now it's time for a question from one of our listeners.
All right, Julia, this is a Massachusetts listener, a mom from Western Mass. Woo-hoo. You're in Mass, so I'm going to let you take the lead on this. So we'll play the question and then give your sage advice.
Hi, Mark and YCBK team. I'm the mom of a rising junior in the western part of Massachusetts, and thanks for all the work you do. My question's about extracurriculars. I hear about the privileged kids who need to be doing the most and under-resourced students who need to really count their home responsibilities. My question is, could you talk about the middle, the kids from mid-level to good public high schools who are just navigating the sports and clubs and arts provided through their schools, many of which, at least in my region, are facing budget cuts and with really no college advising at all? Maybe they're in the band or doing a sport, things their parents did when they were teenagers. As an example, recently I asked a group of peers, did you know it's common for kids to do a lot of community service and put those volunteer hours on college apps? And everyone was surprised and then a little worried. It had just never crossed anyone's mind. How do these kids' applications fare? How do AOs see them? And do you have any advice? Thanks.
Well, hello from Massachusetts. I grew up in Central Mass, so I also have a nice soft spot for Western Mass too, because many people think I live and grew up in Western Mass, even though I definitely did not.
Is that because anything that's not in Boston is seen as Western Mass by Boston people?
Exactly. For this listener, they probably know that anything outside 495 is often considered Western Mass by people who live in Metro West Boston. It's very similar to upstate New York, right? If you're not like in the immediate suburb of New York City or in one of the boroughs, suddenly you're in upstate New York. But I also share that to say that I went to a rural regional high school that did not have, it actually lost accreditation when I was there. It did not have robust offerings in terms of extracurricular involvement. So, and we talk about this a lot. So, and maybe we should be more clear as well that when a student is evaluated, some of the academic information that is provided by the school definitely informs the context for also evaluating the student on the extracurricular level. So the school profile that comes with most students from the school, a school will fill out a school report on the Common App for the student who applies, which also provides some information about what does the school offer, how many students go to college, how many IPs are offered. But that information in itself actually can give an admission officer a really good sense of sort of the robustness of the resources around. But a lot of the time, in addition to that school report form that's required, there is a school profile, which we've talked a lot about. And for maybe less resourced high schools, the school profile, even just the what's on there, will actually inform the admission officer about sort of what the resources of the school are. But often a school profile also explains like if there are what kind of clubs are at the school, what is the extracurricular involvement, do they have National Honor Society, is there a graduation requirement for community service hours? So an admission officer will still use that profile and the school report form to ascertain sort of what are some of the extracurricular resources. So coming from a maybe more rural or under-resourced area, it's very clear that a student might not be able to do the same extracurricular things that one of my students might do. So, for example, Milton Academy might have the same clubs you might find at a public school, in terms of like, an animal wildlife club or an investment club. But what's really different is the resources at my school, which we're really clear about explaining, that are embarrassingly amazing, right? And an admission officer would not expect a student to have the same sort of level of access or resources based on the area they're coming from. So as usual, it's all contextual. And that an admission officer will use all parts of the application to figure out where is this area the student is coming from, and that student is going to be evaluated in the context of that area, not compared to one of my students who they better have taken advantage of all of those extracurricular resources because we don't have budget cuts or we don't miss out on something or we have a lot more extra and our students have a lot of access to these things. So it's all done in context. And I just want to say too, when it comes to community service, just like any other conversation we've had on activities, is that there's no prescription or there's no sort of narrative or resume type that a student needs to have hit all of these boxes to be competitive. So a college is not, unless it requires it, but a college is not expecting nor kind of checking a box to say like, oh, the student did service hours. Good. It's really about meaningful commitment to what you have to work with. So sometimes for students that is volunteer hours, but I've had plenty of students. Milton does not have a National Honor Society. We don't have a requirement for service hours. So I'll have plenty of students that might not have robust service hours or any service hours to report to colleges when they apply, and that's fine. So I also want to be clear that while that might be popular or common when students apply to colleges, there is no set activities or extracurricular activities that they're hoping to see from a student.
Yeah, I've got a couple of thoughts on this, and they're polar opposites. So it's just a stream of consciousness rambling here. One is, this is my fear, and I bring it up quite a bit because we talk about holistic admissions, but in reality, there's so many different gradations as to how comprehensive that assessment is done. Almost everybody says we do holistic admissions because they don't want to say we admit by the numbers. Like, how does that make a kid feel? You're a number and we look at your numbers and we make decisions on your numbers. I mean, some schools do that and they're explicit about it, but most don't. So admission officers like to be able to say we're holistic because basically what that means is we take your whole person and the opportunities that you've been given into consideration when we make admissions decisions. So that feels fair. But as Rick Clark likes to say, holistic admissions is human admissions. And when there's human admissions, you can have potential for being fraught with error. My concern is for schools that are not doing this with all of its complexities, they don't take social class privilege into consideration and they're just wowed by things. And Julia, you talked a lot about the resources that are available at your school. But there's so many other resources that are just available just by being a well-resourced parent that they can do apart from the school.
Yes.
I mean, I saw an 8th grader that I met with very well-resourced recently. I could not believe what this 8th grader had done by 8th grade. I was flabbergasted. And so I do have the concern, like, is that being taken into consideration? Now, having said that, I was having a conversation with one of my students recently, and he was saying, this is when I was at Emory last week, and he was saying, how's the year going? And I was saying, man, I'm just kind of blown away by some of the differences between the activities that you see from your most well-resourced to your least well-resourced. And then he brought up a really important point. He said, well, when you see somebody doing something with depth, that's not just the parents. It still takes that internal drive to really, really accomplish that. So I don't want to minimize and just diminish that either. But so my first point is I do have the same concern is to does the school properly take this into context, or are they so wowed by the activities of the well-resourced family that they're like, oh my goodness, look at this. Now, sometimes those well-resources mean they meet an institutional need, right? You were able to take harp lessons from age 4, and now we need your talents and skills, or you were able to have little Johnny play soccer since 3rd grade, and now he's a recruitable athlete. Like, sometimes that's different in the way I'm looking at it, because those are just explicit institutional needs. But I'm talking about just overall, it looks like super accomplished when somebody else probably would be just as accomplished given the same opportunities. I do have the fear, and I personally think that's one reason why when Ross Chetty did his study, he found 38 schools admit more kids from the top 1% than the bottom 60. Some of that is, there's many, 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 many reasons for that, right? Everything from schools needing money to being able to use ED to being able to advantage your kid for 18 years. But some of it is also extracurriculars and having incredibly impressive extracurriculars, and then people being like, wow, look at this kid. So I have the same concern. Now, having said that, let me go all the way back to the points that Julia was making. Another thing, in addition to the things Julia said, landscape, school profile, on-site visits and knowledge of a school that territory managers and regional reps have, or that institutional history being recorded and passed on, even if there's turnover in the admission office, so that new reps are coming in and they're benefiting from the past knowledge that the territory manager had got from working that territory, doing on-site visits, working with students, from the school over the years. A lot of schools read by school group. And when you read by school group, not always, but a lot of times there's a social class element to a school. And so you're seeing a certain similar kinds of things, and there's a calibration that happens where you kind of get a sense of, in this neighborhood, like, these kinds of things seem to be very impressive. And you're not necessarily expecting what you expect from the more hoity-toity places. And so that calibration can happen when you just read a school together in its, as an entity. And I realize not everybody reads by school group, and I realize it's harder to do now with so many applications and with different rounds of admission, but it's still a tremendous tool in the reading process is to have a calibration by that particular school that can play a role. The other thing that I'll say is, it's not just the activities, but it's what you say about the activities, not from an embellishment standpoint, but like, admission officers can't read minds, right? So you have the opportunity to talk about the significance of the things that you've done and how they shaped you to be who you are. The other thing that I always tell my students to do is to research the schools that you're applying to. Find out things that they offer that really excite you, and then talk about how I am so excited that you offer an opportunity to, to whatever, have a competitive debate team that travels, or to do STEP and whatever it is. I've wanted to do that, and I see you do that. I've seen your social media page. I've seen it's really active. Like, at the end of the day, schools are looking at, what are you going to bring to us? And one way you can sort of elevate that is by conveying your enthusiasm for the opportunities that they provide, even if you also articulate our school never had that opportunity, but I'm so excited about the fact that you guys have it, and I'd love to get involved, and that can kind of elevate your value.
Yeah,
I
great
see
point.
Julia shaking, nodding your head. Anything you want to say on that, Julia?
No, I think that's a great point too, is that actually might strengthen your candidacy, is that you're saying to a college, like, this would be a really transformative and exciting experience for me. This is something I don't have and really look forward to.
Yeah, and for so many years, I did work with a lot of under-resourced students, and so these are some of the kinds of things that we had to just routinely do. And I realized that the question made it clear that we've talked about under-resourced and we've talked about very well-resourced. What about that middle category? But the same thing still applies, that middle category, and especially the descriptions of the activity. I know Western Mass Mom, you made the distinction between under-resourced and middle-resourced, and I think that is a very important distinction. I appreciate you doing that. But some of the examples that you gave, like not knowing about service, these kinds of things, it is very similar to what you might see in a less resourced applicant compared to the crazy, ridiculous stuff you see on the families making $500,000 and more.
Right. Or also just thinking about college going areas, right? Like where I grew up in Central Mass, it was rural, but it was not one of the towns I was near, but not really, generally was not below the poverty level. It was not super low income, but it was not a college going area, right? So even if I had some resources or weren't low resourced, when it came to applying to college, this was not something that people were talking about or savvy about. And that's also something that colleges absolutely take into consideration.
That's a really important point. It's like, is it a college going culture?
Mm-hmm.
And not in the school, the neighborhood, the community, all of those things. Hopefully this was helpful. Did you say anything you wanted to say for Western Mass Mom? Your kin there, your kinfolk?
Go Massachusetts.
Awesome. What town did you grow up in again, Julie? You've told me a million times.
No, Massachusetts.
I've never been there.
No, most people have not. And it's not Stowe, Vermont. That's why I added Massachusetts on the end there.
Cool. Thank you. Thank you, Western Mass listener. Thank you, Julia.
Thank you.
And now this week's interview with a special guest.
Friends, in part one of how admission offices evaluate homeschooled applicants, Holly Ramsey, Michele Evard, and Liam Dailey all introduce themselves. Then Liam, Michele, and Holly share the reasons why students choose homeschooling. Holly shares some of the fascinating statistics on homeschooling. We return to the subject of why students homeschool. We explore it in a more comprehensive way. Holly explains why she feels homeschooling is a humane way to educate. Holly explains how the racial unrest with George Floyd has impacted homeschooling. Liam shares some really creative examples of why some students homeschooled. Michele answers the question, when is a student that learns at home homeschooled, and when is a student that learns at home not homeschooled? And finally, Holly speaks to the efficiency of homeschooling. Listen and enjoy. Friends, you're in for a real treat. We did a segment on homeschooling a while ago with Susan and I, and there was such a good response and questions and a desire to do a little more. And so we've got 3 guests today. We've got Michele Evard, we've got Holly Ramsey, and we've got Liam Dailey. And without any further ado, I'm going to let them all introduce themselves. But we're talking about homeschools, how admission offices evaluate homeschooled applicants. And we know we have a curious audience, so even if your student is not homeschooled, we believe you're going to learn a lot from this interview.
Yeah, first, Mark, thanks for having us on. I'm just thrilled to be able to speak to your audience and tell about a subject that I love. So I'm Holly Ramsey. I homeschooled my 5 kids for more than 20 years across 3 different states. And along the way, founded and organized a variety of clubs, some in my areas of expertise, some well outside my areas of expertise. So science Olympiad clubs and math clubs, anything my kids needed. I also, as I reached the tail end of my homeschooling my own kids, I branched into teaching homeschoolers online. So for several years, I was a Brave Writer coach, teaching more than 600 homeschoolers in a variety of essay classes, including the college admission essay. And back in 2017, I founded my own educational consulting company, Thoughtful Homeschooling, where I specialize, along with Michele, also specializes in working with homeschool students. Professional member of IECA, and within that organization, I founded the Homeschool Affinity Group, and Michele is now the current chair of that group. Lifelong educator, my background is in teaching, and just really happy to be here with you all.
Well, you said a lot of things, but the thing I'm impressed with the most is the 5 kids. You get a gold medal for that. And I'm sure taking them all through homeschooling, you probably learned a lot because they're going to be different, right? So we'll look forward to hearing from you. Michele, you're up next.
Yes, so I too am a lifelong learner, always loved helping other people learn. Doing my doctoral work, was working in an inner city Boston school, helping children learn using technology, but learn in a way that they could communicate with each other and help each other doing long projects. After finishing that, had our own children and decided to homeschool them. So along the way, founded a homeschool cooperative in Illinois, and then when moving to Massachusetts, ran the Voyagers Homeschool Co-op and Resource Center for Homeschoolers. So let's say 3 children, not 5, just 3, and homeschooled them all along until they were ready to be done. So after my own kids graduated and went to college, I became an independent educational consultant. All along, I've been helping other families to design and document their homeschooling. So I've continued that now as a professional member of the organization that Holly mentioned, IECA. 2 from birth through end of high school, and 1 chose to go to public high school and then boarding school. So I have a little bit of everything in there.
Well, I will say, so many of you responded to that segment we did on homeschoolers. And we said in that segment, it'd be great to have an admission officer that specializes in homeschooling students come on. A number of people replied saying, you should have Holly on, you should have Michele on, and others as well. And so I like the descriptions from Holly and Michele. And I'm a professional member of IECA. Lisa's a professional member of IECA. Linda's a member of IECA. It's a professional organization that helps us to uphold the highest standards in professional practice. And it's a learning environment where we can learn and hone our crafts. And so with Holly and Michele both sort of being over that affinity group, IECA, that was immediate credibility for me. And so I met with them and I said, I'd love to talk to you, but I also want an admission officer. And they said, well, we think we have the perfect person. What Michele and Holly said they love about Liam is he was also homeschooled himself from kindergarten through 8th grade. So he really understands homeschooling, both experientially and as a professional. Liam, if everybody likes you, Michele and Holly get all the credit. No pressure. No pressure. We'll let you introduce yourself next.
Thanks, Mark. Thanks for having me. So my name is Liam Dailey. I'm a Senior Associate Director of Admissions for Beloit College. Beloit's a great liberal arts college in southern Wisconsin, a member of Colleges That Change Lives, and I think a very homeschool-friendly place. I've been working in admissions for about 10 years, and throughout that time, among a number of other responsibilities, homeschoolers have always been a specialty of mine. Part of that comes from the fact that I was homeschooled myself K through 8. So I have personal anecdotal experience with the homeschool world and the wide breadth of experiences that students and families have and reasons they come to homeschooling. And so I've been able to bring some of that personal lens to my work in admissions. At Beloit right now, I read all of our homeschool applications and work with homeschoolers who are thinking about applying, as well as working on some of our homeschool policy and making sure that we're trying to treat homeschoolers equitably in the process. So thrilled to be here. Great.
So I'm actually going to start right away with something that you said there, Liam. What are the reasons people homeschool?
Well, there are about as probably as many reasons that people homeschool as there are homeschoolers, right? So I think there are some folks who do it for philosophical reasons in terms of the type of education that they're trying to offer. There are folks who do it because other types of education have ended up not being a good fit for their students, right? So there are folks who are lifers. There are folks who come to it halfway through high school. I know we saw an uptick in homeschoolers during COVID who felt like they really weren't getting served with virtual options that the public schools were offering. So tons and tons of different options. But I'm sure Holly and Michele can elaborate on that.
Anything either one of you want to add to that?
The one thing that all homeschoolers have in common is that for some reason, at some point, the typical education system did not work for them. That is the only thing we all have in common. You can find many stereotypes, but that's the baseline.
That makes sense. So let's talk about. Go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to add to that sometimes we think of this as a firm line between traditionally schooled students and homeschoolers. It is actually a very porous boundary. And in fact, what we know from research is that more than half of all homeschoolers are in a conventional school at some point or another. So, sometimes we think about this as non-intersecting circles, but it's actually much more a Venn diagram, I think.
I actually think that's helpful because I do think sometimes there's a stereotype out there that homeschoolers can't function sort of in mainstream society. And so, and Michelle's just shaking her head like that stereotype just won't die as much as I try to educate people.
That's right. The stereotype won't die. What we find is when you're in a typical school, you're with a bunch of people your age, and there is one expert in the room. You're all supposed to learn from that expert. And I have no issue with teachers. I love teaching, but that's a really hard construct when you compare it to day-to-day life. We're not typically in the situation where there's one expert and we are all the ones to learn, and we're with everybody who's within 12 months of our age. So when a homeschooler is in the world and interacting all the time naturally, they learn so much about socializing with everybody.
I like that. That's a great answer. Let's talk about statistics. Are homeschoolers on the decline, inclines, pretty static over the last 10 years? Are there any states maybe that have more homeschoolers? Just kind of give a little bit of the statistical overview of where homeschoolers at is. How many, like, anybody know the percentage of students that homeschool? Anything at all from a statistical standpoint that any of you wants to share?
Yeah, I can jump in with that. So there's a simple answer and there's a complicated answer. So the simple answer is there are lots of homeschoolers and there's lots more now than there used to be. That we know with a lot of confidence. There's a lot of things about the homeschooling population we don't know with a lot of confidence. And one reason for that is not all states require homeschoolers to register with the state. So sometimes it's just not tracked. And then different measures reveal different nuances. So we do know that up until the pandemic, estimates were somewhere just over 3% of the population of school children were homeschooled. That skyrocketed, obviously, during the pandemic, during COVID, up to about 11% I've seen during fall of 2020. Now, that's back down some. It's back down. But homeschooling is still elevated from what it was pre-pandemic. And I think that's a trend that's here to stay. So depending on where you look, you're going to get a different number. But Washington Post back in the fall, I believe, they did their own survey and had their own methodology about it and wrote a whole article. What I found interesting there was the most populous state for homeschoolers. Most homeschoolers are in Florida right now, according to the research they have. But the most rapid growth is occurring in New York, where the number of homeschoolers has more than doubled since 2017. And what they found, in at least what Washington Post found, was that this increase is coming across every measure of politics, geography, and demographics. So whatever preconception people had about homeschooling, you might as well throw it out the window, because we saw something like over a 350% increase in homeschoolers in Little Anderson, South Carolina, and we saw over a 350% increase in homeschoolers in a school district in the Bronx. So it is exploding everywhere. It's here to stay. And just by way of comparison, the Washington Post thinks there's somewhere between 1.9 to 2.7 million homeschoolers currently. I think Michele and I would probably agree that's probably an undercount, But by comparison, there's about 1.7 million students in Catholic schools in the country and about 3.7 million students in charter schools. So that just gives you sort of a feel for the population. We are small but mighty and certainly growing.
That's great. That's great. Friends, there's no recommended resource during any part of this 4-part interview about homeschooling because in parts 3 and 4, Holly and Michele and Liam will share 4 or 5 specific recommendations related to homeschooling as part of the interview. I want to go back to why people homeschool because I think it's important. So I want to share just some of the reasons I encounter people homeschooling, and I want you to sort of supplement any ones that I don't mention because I know there's a lot of reasons, right? So, so COVID, there's some people that during COVID either homeschooled either because they wanted to have, synchronous education as opposed to Zoom education. Also safety issues, health issues. That's maybe more related to the pandemic, more recent, but we know homeschooling has been growing for a really, really long time. Like, homeschooling was surging way, way, way before the pandemic. So other people sometimes homeschool because they have a gifted child and there's an ability to customize an education and go at a different pace than you would in a regular class. And we know a lot of homeschoolers are very high achieving academically and will thrive in that environment. In some ways, almost similar to you getting one-on-one test prep as opposed to going into a group test prep situation, right? I can meet you where you're at and go at your own pace. Certainly there's some homeschool communities where you have access to like all these incredible people, like maybe former college professors that have retired and they still want to stay active. And homeschooling's not just the mom doing all the teaching. There's like, oh, this guy's got the PhD in biochemistry and he'll do this. And then there's this person that's got the PhD in Portuguese and you can learn that language. And so like there's that kind of reason. And then there's, I guess, a lot of stuff related to values. Either I don't feel the school system aligns with my home values, whether that's religious-based or not religious-based. And I can be in a safe environment, not necessarily from like COVID, but maybe safe from a values standpoint. I can find something that's a values match, similar to why some people may choose certain private schools that align with their values. So those are some of the things that come to mind. Are there any others that, and I see Michele wants to take this one on. So what did I leave out? I just did this extemporaneously. I didn't write this down ahead of time or anything, but I know that I didn't cover all the areas.
Those are great reasons. But sometimes the mom
Athletics.
has the PhD.
Sure.
Sometimes the mom has the PhD.
I know.
Okay. So yeah, actually in the homeschool resource center that I ran, we had a lot of very highly educated parents and we supported each other, ran things that were in our interests. One of the great things about homeschooling is when you can connect your kids to mentors who are really interested in what they're doing. It's amazing because the kids see that and they see the authentic excitement that somebody has for their area. You mentioned gifted kids and pacing. Absolutely. Gifted children have asynchronous development. And so sometimes they are so far ahead in one subject and really not in another, especially if they're twice exceptional. Kids with learning differences. You can support your child in learning when they are ready to learn. Children learn to talk at similar ages and walk at similar ages, but we don't all learn the same words in the same order or on the same date. Similarly, when we're learning fractions and multiplication, we might not be ready at the same time.
And by the way, Michele's one of those people with the PhD. I should have called you Dr. Evard, but I just called you Michele. Holly, and I did think of one other thing. You have people like who are really into their sport. Like you see the gymnasts and the person, right? Because a lot of times those people will do like a Laurel Springs or something like that for that reason. But homeschooling can like work around your other strong commitments. Maybe it's a high-level musician that needs to practice 3 or 4 hours a day. But Holly, you wanted to add something.
Yeah, I think something that sometimes gets lost in this, although it's connected to all the reasons you both have mentioned, but homeschooling is a humane way to educate. And what I mean by that is even something as simple as we know homeschoolers get more sleep, and they get an average of an hour per night more sleep. So when I look at our teenagers today, and many of them are struggling, something as basic as sleep matters a lot. So I don't want that humane element of homeschooling to go overlooked, especially in today's environment. And yeah, there's tons of high achievers in homeschooling, but that in and of itself can be a bit of a stereotype. There's plenty of just average kids doing average work in homeschooling as well. And they also get into good colleges and get good education and go on to do wonderful things with their lives. So again, it's hard to name any one reason. You touched on values, and I think that certainly can be one. But what we're seeing too is, sometimes you hear values and people automatically think, oh, conservative Christian homeschooler. There certainly are conservative Christian homeschoolers, but we're also seeing a tremendous growth in the diversity of homeschooling, particularly not just pandemic, but coming out of the racial unrest and concern for racial justice in this country coming out of 2020. We're seeing a lot of parents in the homeschooling community who don't want to present what they view as a whitewashed version of events to their students. So that's also a significant area of growth in our community.
That makes sense. Go ahead, Liam. You want to add something to that?
Yeah, I want to add two things. The first one is just a couple of fun examples, because of course you have the serious athletes and musicians, actors, all those sorts of things. But also sometimes it's really niche hobbies. Some of the fabulous homeschoolers I've worked with, I had a student who was an avid falconer.
Wow, I don't even know what that is.
had the falcon on the wrist and was hunting with it and training it and all those sorts of things. And also a homeschooler who was a really dedicated blacksmith. Wow. Had been devoting 6+ hours a day to the craft of blacksmithing, from 10 years old or something like that. Right. So there's just space when students have that kind of passion and curiosity and excitement about something like that, that's really unlikely to be included in a traditional curriculum, to let them follow that passion. And that's the thing I was going to say also overall philosophically. I love the shaping of a humane education. I think also homeschooling families have the opportunity to keep education grounded in curiosity and passion and excitement. And that's often something that, again, cuts across a lot of different reasons that people are homeschooling, right? And different curriculums and things like that. But at the core of it, to keep in a 6-year-old kid, a 8-year-old kid, a 10-year-old kid, to keep them really excited about all the interesting opportunities they have, instead of learning becoming this thing that's stressful and forced and has to happen in this one place all day, every day. There are a lot of fabulous schools out there, a lot of fabulous teachers, a lot of people working really hard, but overall, a lot of times the brick and mortar school building can be a really challenging place to be every day. And so homeschoolers have a real advantage there to make education the amazing thing it is, right? Something that we've all enjoyed for our whole lives and plan to keep on enjoying, but to make sure that that's at the heart of the student experience.
No, that's great. I think it's helpful to expand the perspective there. And I think you continually, all of you, keep doing that and showing sort of how diverse the homeschooler is. I think that's, we're just getting started. And I think that's already coming through loudly and clearly from everybody. So let's talk a little bit about definition. So when is a student who learns at home not a homeschooled applicant? Or are you by nature a homeschooled student if you learn at home? Does anybody want to take that one?
Sure. If you enroll in an online school, like you mentioned one before, then you are a student at that institution. They provide your transcript. They do the documentation. They tell you what you have to study, when you have to study it, and how to graduate, right? You are still a schooled student, even if you're at home. Holly briefly touched on sleep and mental health crisis in this country. That's another reason that people homeschool, is if a kid has had a mental health challenge. And that plays into this, the need to have that flexible schedule, or having somebody else not determine what you do. But some of those kids are schooling at home, like your local public school district may have. They'll send a student a teacher home for the student if they've had a physical or mental health challenge, but you're still a student in the school, right? Even though you're doing it at home. So if you are taking the responsibility from the state and saying, hey, I'm homeschooling, I'm not following your guidelines, then you're a homeschooler.
That's clear. I want to go back to the sleep question or sleep value humanity piece that Holly brought up. So why would homeschoolers get more sleep? Like, is that intentionally because people that lead homeschooling have that value and they make sure of that? Does that have to do with the fact that you're just by not going back and forth on a bus or, and doing all the other things that sometimes you do in a traditional school setting, there's just time savings built in? Like, what's the reason for more sleep?
So I think it is a matter of efficiency, all right? Homeschooling can be very efficient. First of all, you're not trying to assess where 25 students are in their understanding of a concept. You're talking with your kid at lunch and suddenly realize, oh, shoot, that lesson, I thought that they got something. There's a gap here. I need to circle back. Or, wow, this kid is super mathy. He does not need to do 25 practice problems. He did 3 perfectly. He wants to go on. I'm talking to him. He clearly gets the concept. We're moving on. So I think homeschooling is just much more efficient. And, we know in group settings, it just takes a certain amount of time to shuttle the kids from class to class and do that transition, get out your supplies and all that. So I think homeschooling cuts out a lot of what students don't need while providing them with the time to really dive deep into what they do want to do. I don't think that it's that homeschoolers have early bedtimes. I don't think that's what it is. I could be wrong. So I will just tell you that I know the research says that they get an hour more sleep. I don't think it gave me all the reasons why, but I'm pretty confident that's because in general, homeschooling is a one-to-one bespoke educational path.
You don't have to wake your kid up at 6 a.m. so that they catch the bus. And I don't know if you've ever tried to wake up a teenager, but it's not the easiest thing to do to wake them up when they haven't gotten enough sleep. So, a parent can see that and recognize the need for more sleep. You don't have to homeschool from 9 to 3 at your kitchen table. That's a stereotype that we're trying to fight.
Friends, this concludes the first part of a 4-part interview on how admission offices evaluate homeschooled applicants. We hope you join us next week for part 2 of 4.
And now it's time for our College Spotlight of the Week.
Well, this is awesome. So far, we've talked FAFSA, we've talked fit and selectivity. Let's transition to Ursinus. Like you said in our first segment, you've been at quite a few places. Northeastern is different than Ursinus. Drexel's very different from Ursinus. Haverford is different, and Wentworth is different, just in terms of location and their focus. So, just give us an overview about Ursinus and how would you say it's different than the other places you've worked at?
Sure. It's certainly different size-wise from the biggest places that I've worked for were Northeastern and Drexel, which I would say are very similar. Probably be hard-pressed to find 2 other places that are more similar than the 2 of them, both in terms of their historical origins and current state of operations in many ways. And Ursinus is probably closest to Haverford College, both traditional classic liberal arts colleges, both in the same athletic conference, Centennial League, and roughly the same size. And that's part of why I was so interested in coming to Ursinus. I was at Drexel 5.5 years, had a wonderful experience, and have left having acquired additional chosen family, some of which I'm in touch with on a daily basis. But I was really excited about coming back to a small liberal arts college because that's, even though I didn't attend one, but that's the kind of environment that I enjoy the most professionally. And it hasn't disappointed. It's just an exciting place. Our president, Robin Hannigan, has brought in, who just started a few months before I did, has brought in a lot of new energy and is not afraid to try new things and think of different ideas. And I think that we are set up to be a really great place for students in terms of that traditional liberal arts model. Where they're taught to choose their own path and question norms and take risks and experiment, but with very intentional purpose behind it. And that's growth as citizens, it's intellectual and academic growth, it's career preparation, and we have a really fascinating undergraduate curriculum called Quest, Open Questions, Open Minds, and it's really centered around 4 very important and strategic and intentional questions that kind of set up the framework academically and intellectually, but also in terms of how students play out in terms of living on our campus. And those questions are, what should matter to me? How should we live together? How can we understand the world? And what will I do? So when we were talking about how the world has changed a lot over the years, and just thinking about big, important questions like that, that are so applicable to being in college and learning, but also just living a life, right? And so there's a lot of focus on how liberal education can improve an individual's life, but also how individuals that come to a place like Ursinus and get this kind of education can take it and deliver it to the world and provide better experiences for the world and for other folks as well. So I think I think we have a system here that provides a really great bridge between antiquity and modernity in terms of the liberal arts experience. So, you will get the classical liberal arts education, but you also get very well prepared to enter the workforce. You'll know how to problem solve. You'll know how to work with different groups of folks. You will be exposed and get to work with, cutting edge technologies that weren't available back in ancient Greece and Rome when the foundations of Western education were being founded. But, we continue to provide little wrinkles and adjust and adapt as we move on. And I think Ursinus has just done a really good job of adjusting and adapting and keeping the core of that traditional liberal arts experience, but providing new improvements and wrinkles that are applicable and necessary for students in the 21st century.
Yeah, and if people are wondering, where is this Ursinus? It's in Collegeville, which is 25 miles west of Philadelphia, right around 1,500 students, all undergraduate. Is that around where the numbers are, Michael?
That's right, yes. Montgomery County, PA, one of the main suburban Philadelphia counties.
Talk to us a little bit more about the president's vision. You mentioned earlier the president's got some really exciting things going on that, partly drew you there, that you really like. Go into a little bit more detail about the president's vision.
So when I was even thinking about this role, and I had applied and was thinking about, would I take this job if I was offered, have a few mentors in the business that I consulted, and, they all said that regardless of how great the school is, you want to make sure that you're on the same page with the president. And I think that's always important, but at a small liberal arts college, that is particularly important. So in my meetings with her, one of the first things that I wanted to know about was, well, where do you want this to go? Like you're looking for a VP for enrollment management. What are your ideas? What are your visions? And a lot of times presidents just want a school to be the next place with a 10% or 5% admit rate, and that's not at all what she's looking for. This place has been historically. One of the things I really love about it is that we can do a really great job with those students that have perfect scores and perfect transcripts and just a shiny, glossy presentation, and we do really well with those students. But we also do well with those students who have shown promise and have some things going on, but also have some unrealized potential, and we could help get them to the next level. And she wants to keep that. She wants to keep that access for for students. She wants this to be a really strong destination for lower and middle income students. She wants it to be a good destination for first generation students, to continue to be that for Pell eligible students, which we have higher level almost every year than many places that have a lot more money and could afford to have a higher percentage of Pell eligible students. But we're doing that work. So being able to, I think, being a small liberal arts college, it's a category that most college-bound students don't go to private small liberal arts colleges. Most folks who go to college also don't go to flagship state schools. Those flagship state schools may be big places with tens of thousands of students, but the majority of students are going to public schools that are close to their homes, and that you don't see on TV all the time, but that folks know because they're there in the community, right? So I love the idea of having this kind of education and being able, even though it's a small school, so there's always only going to be a finite amount of folks who are studying at Ursinus, but being able to provide this kind of education to as many different kinds of folks coming from as many different kinds of places and backgrounds is really, really exciting to me, because I just understand the transformative value of higher ed in general, but certainly this kind of liberal education that we provide at schools like Ursinus.
When you have students that say one of the reasons they came to your school was because they were really impressed with a particular department, what are some of the departments/programs that you'll hear most frequently mentioned from students?
We hear it about all of them, and students aren't declaring a major right away with us. They're doing that either after the earliest would be middle of first year, and most students are doing it sort of in the middle of the second year. But biology is certainly really popular. Health, exercise, and physiology, economics. We've had a great creative writing program, but now we have it as a full major and not just a concentration in English. So we're seeing lots of interest in that. Spread out between, we do a really great job with the humanities, social sciences, and natural sciences. And then I think something that is lost on a lot of folks is we have really strong visual and performing arts programs as well. So theater and dance and music, and a new theater tech program as well. And we have our Berman Art Museum, which is right on campus, that a lot of folks don't know about. So I was super excited the other day. We were taking a tour, and I'm not an expert on art, but I do know what I like. And seeing a Warhol in there was kind of, I'm obsessed with pop culture, so it doesn't get much more pop culture iconic than an Andy Warhol. And I've been here several months and didn't know that I'm working on a campus that has one.
Yeah, all of those programs are ones that I've heard good feedback. I've also heard really good feedback on your international relations, political science, and environmental studies as well. Anything you want to say about those?
I would say all great programs, and we get lots of positive feedback about all of them. And environmental studies in particular, I think that's, along with the arts, another area. Environmental studies and sustainability in general, I think people don't realize what a big focus that is here. So we have a experimental farm and food forest here, and lots of great sustainability efforts. And anyone who's ever been to big admission events like admitted student days or open houses, you're probably used to seeing lots of balloons on campus to indicate this is where you walk into the space. And Robin Hannigan, our president, she banned balloons at the events because of the detrimental environmental factors. So we have reusable ones, but not the ones that blow up and float away and end up in trees and waterways and airstreams. And so even that was something that, just hearing that one little detail was something that connected with me and made me realize this is a place that I think I'm going to be really excited to work, and really excited to roll up my sleeves and see what we could do to get to an even better place than we were when I started a year ago. And I think that is something that's a little bit different from, not completely unique, but a little bit different from some of the other places, having a few decisively pre-professional programs in the mix. And I think it also helps with our diversity, because it draws in some students that otherwise may not be looking at a liberal arts college. And I think that a lot of times we have some students that come in and they like Ursinus because we have a beautiful campus, or they like the academic program, or all the different reasons that folks may be attracted to a school, but they may not have a grasp on what a liberal arts college really is. They know it's smaller than a flagship public or something like that. But then when they get here, they have a better understanding of, kind of like I did when I went to Haverford, is where I first started to have an understanding of liberal education and what it meant to be at a liberal arts college, and it kind of clicks. But I also appreciate that, if you are in one of those more pre-professional programs, and everywhere has it in the sciences, right? Biology is always popular because many people take that for pre-med, but everything that we do, so whether it's, biology, applied econ, exercise physiology, they may be pre-professional, but they're taught through the lens of liberal education. And that's something that I think is so very important, because, you can be the most technically educated and brilliant mind, but if you don't know how to work with and communicate with other folks, then you're never going to realize your full potential. I know I've certainly had the experience of going to a doctor, and I didn't like the way they were communicating with me, the way they were explaining everything, and I didn't care where they went to school, undergrad, or where they had their MD from. I just needed to find another doctor that I was going to be comfortable with, because I didn't have time to do all the studying and going to med school myself. So I needed to have someone that I could trust when they're explaining everything to me. And I think liberal education goes a long way into making that happen. So even huge, comprehensive, or pre-professionally focused universities, they only get to a certain place unless they have a really strong foundation of traditional liberal arts majors, usually called a College of Arts and Sciences or something like that. But if you don't have an arts and science program in order, then you have a limited opportunity for growth and success.
You guys have always impressed me with your med school pathways. Like, you have a high med school placement track record, higher than you would expect for a school that does take a range of students. What are you guys doing over there to make that happen? Because I will oftentimes send pre-med students your way. I know we know about the strength of your biology program, but it feels like it has to be a little more than just that.
I think it's a couple of things. I mean, the faculty here in biology and the sciences in general, and everything that we offer, are really strong. But it's not just that they're strong, but this is another great thing about a liberal arts college, but the access, right? And these places like Ursinus, when I interviewed here, I went home and I told my wife, I interviewed with 23 different faculty and staff members, and I enjoyed the conversation with every single one of them. And I like people, but that's still a way higher percentage than what would normally happen. But the reason that I appreciated everybody is it was clear that they didn't think of Ursinus as just a place of employment. They thought of it as their community. And so many of the professors and staff members live on or really close to campus, so they're here all the time. And if you have small classes, you have 5 people in a class, which one of our admission officers was saying the other day when she was a student here, she had a class with only 4 other people. You get to know the students, and you get to have those connections, and you get to have a deeper kind of relationship, and you maybe recommend them to jobs or internships when you know folks in the field. And so I think those things, and also not declaring a major right away. So even if you know you want to do pre-med, but having the opportunity to take courses across the curriculum, I think helps sharpen and focus the mind and trains you to think in different ways. And so then when you are focusing on organic chem and all the other things that you're taking for med school preparation, and you're working closely with faculty, and you have research opportunities that you may not have as easily at a research university because there's grad students for that. So our undergrads are often doing some things that other folks may not get to experience for many years later down the road in their formal educational path.
Do you guys still have that summer fellows program? You had like a really good summer fellows program. I visited you guys in 2019. I had a great visit there. If you do, talk to us a little bit about that.
We do still have the summer fellows program, and I mentioned research and student professor mentorship is part of the program. So while we don't have summer classes on campus, at least currently, but we have students that stick around and are engaged in research and working with professors and and sharing findings with the rest of the community. So it's a great opportunity and experience, and I think for some of our students it helps set them on a path for a career in academia, and maybe it deters some from that path as well. But to me, experiences are valuable, and figuring out what you want to do more of and figuring out what you don't want to do, those are equally valuable discoveries, in my opinion. Particularly now, where so many students who are college age are going to end up having careers and jobs, some of which don't even exist yet. So there is no direct pre-professional training, but they're going to have to problem solve. They're going to have to learn how to work in groups. They're going to have to read and think critically, and so they'll get those foundational skills that can be applicable anywhere. And certainly, this day and age, you have to have some technology skills and background, but you're always going to have that. That is always going to change very quickly, right? You get a new cell phone that's top of the line, and it's only top of the line for a couple of weeks until something else comes out, right? But for thousands and thousands of years, it's been a great skill to be able to stand in front of an audience and do public speaking, express your ideas, to persuade people, to be able to negotiate, to be able to understand folks that have a different background and perspective. So that's the kind of training and education that the brand of liberal education that we do here at Ursinus allows students to receive that and then use it after they leave.
Friends, this completes the first half. Hope you'll join us next week for the final part. On Monday's episode, we'll have a speak pipe question, and I have about 8 in the kitty to pick from, and I'll select one as it gets a little closer to recording time that makes sense at that time. And then we'll start a brand new interview, Jeffrey Salingo, a leader in the world of higher ed, and we'll be talking about how you can know if a school is financially stable. And that's a 2-part interview. Friends, apparently Thomas Edison was once told, "You are incredible. You are a genius." And Thomas Edison's response was, 99% of inspiration is perspiration. In other words, hard work, sweat equity. See you on Monday, friends. And that's our show. A big thank you to you, our listeners, for tuning in this week. If you find this podcast helpful, please follow us, and you'll get every single episode as soon as it is released. If you're interested, there are a few ways you can really support our podcast. You can click the share button and send it to your friends and acquaintances. You can help us pay our staff and our expenses by donating on our website. You can write a review for us on Apple or Spotify. I'm the producer of the podcast, but we have a fantastic team of 15. Shout out to our co-host, Dr. Lisa Ruff, Dr. David Williams, Linda Depker, Susan Tree, Vince Garcia, and Julia Esquivel. And to our substitute co-host, Sylvia Borgo. Our sensational sound engineer is Nemanja Motvich. Our amazing music is from Victor Allen Weeks. Marketing designs are from Kimberly Blass. Lily Parikh manages our Instagram. Our image editor is Talha Khan. Joyce Ducker does our website episode updates. And our webmaster is Stylianos Dimitriou. And if you want to have a coaching session with Lisa, Linda, or me, just text me at 404-664-4340. If you have a question you want us to answer, or if you have a recommended resource or article you think we should discuss, just send it to questions@yourcollegeboundkid.com. Our favorite method is for you to record your own voice at speakpipe.com/YCBK. By the way, check out our website, where you'll find lots of content that is not on any podcast app. Our website is yourcollegeboundkid.com. If you want to learn about other hot admissions topics, follow us on Twitter at YCBK Podcast. We think of you as our listening family, and we look forward to meeting again with you every single Monday and Thursday.